Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Louella Parsons and Hedda Hopper were powerful, unconventional women who ruled Hollywood at a time when women were still considered second-class citizens. Thriving amid glamour and wealth, these gossip columnists, with a readership of about 75 million, could make or break the career of an aspiring actor, writer or director. Hedda Hopper versus Louella Parsons. How the two Harpies struck terror in Hollywood. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Hedda Hopper, the woman who scared Hollywood. Hollywood's venomous pen, Hedda Hopper. Hedda Hopper proved you can get pretty far with an unkind word. After an unremarkable career in pictures, Hopper turned around and became a gossip columnist, and one of the most feared people in Hollywood. Vindictive, cruel, and unrepentant, she was a leading proponent of the blacklist, and made sure to ruin dozens of careers. Even so, millions of readers could not help themselves. Everyone wanted to know what Hedda knew. She was a gossip queen who struck terror in Hollywood. Hedda's revelations, whether true or false, enraptured tens of millions of Americans and struck terror into the hearts of the biggest movers and shakers in the movie business. For as long as Hollywood has existed, gossip has greased its skids. Who was sleeping with whom? Who was the father of whose baby? Who hated who and why? Who got the latest and best studio contract? And who knew how to keep a secret and who did not? The history of Hollywood is replete with jaw-dropping narratives of slow-burning, mean-spirited, and womb-to-tomb animosities between famous people. Many of these feuds occurred during Hollywood's golden age, the period that lasted from the end of the silent era to the 1960s. When the LA Times launched the infamous gossip column Hedda Hopper's Hollywood in 1938, its writer quickly became the most feared person in showbiz. Spencer Tracy once confronted Hopper at Ciro's and kicked her in the behind for printing a blind item on his affair with Katharine Hepburn. Zazu Pitts compared her to a ferret, and Joan Bennett actually had a live skunk delivered to her. The Sweet Smell of Success, J.J. Hunsucker, is said to be partially based on her. If you were a star from 1940 to 1965, there was no escaping her clutches. Ingrid Bergman, once a friend of Hopper's, committed two of those cardinal sins when she convinced Hopper she was not pregnant with director Robert Rossellini's baby. It was later confirmed in Parsons's column, which also ran in the LA Times, and Hopper went on a campaign to smear Bergman's name every chance she got. Not only was she a regular fixture at star-studded dinner parties, she also hosted celebrities at her fabulous house on Tropical Avenue in Beverly Hills. Hopper, a former struggling actress who finally struck it rich in her 50s by spilling the dirt on all her friends, called it the house that fear built. As famous for her flamboyant hats as she was for outing Hollywood's blacklist in her columns, the most hated woman in Hollywood, according to the New York Post, relished in the glamour of it all, but rubbing elbows didn't make her any less cutthroat. If you didn't take her call, you were dead. If you lied to her, you were dead. If you gave a good story to her rival Louella Parsons, you were dead. Hedda Hopper and Louella Parsons had a powerful rivalry. Betty Davis and Joan Crawford's feud was reintroduced the world to these two Hollywood Harpies, who not only turned America into a celebrity-crazed nation. While women may have been Hollywood's earliest sexual harassment victims, Luella and Hedda acquired money, fame, and power by peddling gossip, the more salacious the better. At one point they had, between them, the largest readership in the country. In a nation of 160 million, their combined readership of 75 million was comprised of nearly half the country. They were wielding devastating power over the careers of stars such as Orson Welles, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Grace Kelly, and Ingrid Bergman. The most notorious sibling rivalry in film history, for example, was between Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland, and then there was the clash of titans William Randolph Hearst and Orson Welles, the lifelong fight between Liz Taylor and Debbie Reynolds, and even a rivalry between Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Most people know a lot about the never-ending battle between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, because it was all fuelled by Luella and Hedda. Ironically though, one of the wildest, bawdiest and most famous feuds in Hollywood's history was between these two oracles of sleaze. There are two Hollywoods, the fantasy that exists in the mind of every moviegoer, and the harsh realities of the motion picture industry. Particularly in the first 50 years of film, these worlds had no intersection. The beauty, glamour and goodwill imagined by the audience had nothing in common with the secretive, ruthless business that created these dreams. That is why two aggressive, ambitious gossip columnists, Louella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, yielded so much power. Louella Parsons seems to have had as many secrets as the tycoons she covered. She claimed to have been born in 1893, but courthouse records in her hometown show her to be 12 years older. Her father, who died when she was not quite 9 years old, owned and operated the Star Clothing House in Freeport, Illinois. She was the oldest of 5 children, 3 of whom died in infancy. The family was Jewish, although Parsons never recognized herself as such, and was later to become a deeply devout Catholic convert. After graduating from Dixon High School, where her new stepfather had moved the family, Luella attended the local college, then taught school, and worked as a reporter. It is probably through her newspaper work that she met her first husband, John Parsons. The Dixon City Directory of 1900 lists him as a reporter for the Evening Telegraph. Luella at the time was a part-time employee of the Star. When they married in 1905 and moved to Burlington, Iowa, she was 24 and he was 32. Their daughter, Harriet Parsons, was born the following year. In later years, Luella claimed that her husband died aboard a transport ship in World War I, which may have been true, but there is strong evidence to suggest that they were divorced before his death. Unhappy in small-town Iowa, she moved to Chicago with her daughter, where she met and married her second husband, Jack McCaffrey, probably in 1915. It is not known how long they were married. Once in Hollywood she never mentioned his name and always called Dr. Harry, Docky Martin, whom she married in 1931, her second husband. Parsons combined her romanticism with a practical tenacity. During her years in Chicago, she worked in the syndication department of the Chicago Tribune and wrote film scenarios at night for a small movie studio, which later hired her as a story editor. When she suspected accurately that she was about to be fired from that job, she wrote a book, How to Write for the Movies, that sold well and was serialized. In 1914 she started a gossip column in the Chicago Record-Herald. When the paper folded 4 years later, she moved to New York and took a job with the Morning Telegraph, and later the American. Hedda Hopper took a more circuitous route to her gossip column. Born Elder Furry in 1885, not 1890 as she later claimed, she was the middle child in a family of 9 children, 7 of whom survived infancy. Her father was a simple butcher. Both her mother and father worked in their butcher shop in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, and had little time to coddle their children. It was not by chance that Elder grew into a woman who found it difficult, if not impossible, to express any kind of tenderness, and who gloried in a reputation for bitchiness. Hopper left school in the 8th grade to become a bill collector for the by then defunct butcher shop. Her parents squelched her early theatrical ambitions. In 1903, at age 18, she ran away. She is thought to have attended the Carter Conservatory of Music in Pittsburgh at some point during the next 5 years. In 1908, she moved to New York, telling everyone she was 18. It did not take long for Elder Curry, as she had begun to call herself, to get a job as a chorus girl. She first appeared on stage in New York on December 3, 1908, in The Pied Piper, where she met her husband, actor DeWolf Hopper, who, at 50, was 5 years older than her father. She became his 5th wife in 1913. A son, William de Wolfe Hopper Jr., who would be known for his role as private detective Paul Drake on the Perry Mason television series, was born 2 years later. She continued a stage career with moderate success and began to get screen roles, 4 of them in 1917 alone. She had been calling herself Elder Miller, but in 1919 decided another new name might be the career boost she needed. She went to a numerologist who, for $10, recommended Hedda Hopper. Hopper was apparently pleased, because it was the final name she gave herself. Indeed, it seemed to work. In 1926, Louella Parsons dubbed Hopper Queen of the Quickies. Parsons, already well established as a gossip columnist by that time, was dogged by a persistent rumour that she kept her job by blackmailing her boss, William Randolph Hearst, about a murder she had seen him commit aboard his yacht off the California coast in 1924. It was nonsense. She was a dogged reporter who worked longer and harder than her colleagues. Hearst was a career-long supporter because her columns sold newspapers. In 1926, Hearst sent Parsons to Los Angeles to recuperate from lung problems. She regretted leaving her daughter, who was a Wellesley College student, but she could not resist the chance to become motion picture editor for Hearst's Universal News Service, where her work would appear not only in the New York American, but in 6 other newspapers, including the Los Angeles Examiner. Her timing was fortuitous. The era of the silent film was coming to a close, and, with it, an industry recession. The advent of talkies posed the first serious threat to the legitimate theatre and gave Hollywood a much-needed boost. Parsons' personal life as well as her career benefited. In 1931 she married Dr. Martin and finally found a measure of marital happiness. Hedda Hopper had moved to Hollywood too, but did not fare as well. After a 1922 divorce, she was the sole support of herself and her son, and was working hard to give him the social and educational opportunities she never had. But she lost her savings in the 1929 stock market crash. During the Depression, her film career ended. She had no offers, though her price had dropped from $1,000 per week in 1917 to $1,000 per film in 1935. Hopper resorted to selling real estate and cosmetics, and at times was nearly destitute. Then in 1935, at age 50, a friend who admired her vivid speaking style offered her a job writing a weekly Hollywood fashion article for a Washington, D.C. newspaper. That a washed-up, middle-aged actress represented a potential challenge to the uncrowned Queen of Hollywood was beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But not for long. By 1938, Hopper was writing a Hollywood column for the Esquire Features Syndicate that was carried by 13 newspapers, one of them the Los Angeles Times. With a local outlet, she could no longer be ignored. A year or two later, her style became more caustic and more successful. Meanwhile, it was said that Luella was beginning to see herself more as a star than a fan. She took some film roles with disastrous results. In 1939 she suffered 3 major setbacks. Hedda scooped her on the James Roosevelt-Betsy Cushing divorce. The Saturday Evening Post published a scathing profile of her, and she found out about Clark Gable's marriage to Carole Lombard no sooner than other members of the press. In her line of work, these were catastrophic events, and she was devastated. By the mid-1930s, studio heads grew increasingly alarmed at Luella's fear-invoking demands and her power to influence business deals throughout the movie industry. Louis B. Mayer and others decided to create a rival gossip columnist who would be strong enough to limit Luella's power. Their choice was a 53-year-old, moderately successful character actress, Hedda Hopper, who for years had provided Luella with Hollywood insider gossip in exchange for well-placed publicity in her column. Hedda initially posed no threat to Luella's empire. However, as she filled her column with bare-nailed bitchery, producers and studio heads steered exclusives her way, and Hedda's career flourished. Her column was soon published in the Los Angeles Times and syndicated in daily and weekly newspapers throughout the country. Ultimately, as the Louis B. Mayer character notes in the 1985 made-for-television movie Malice in Wonderland, in his efforts to diminish Luella's power, he didn't get rid of one monster, but instead he created two. Although Luella and Hedda are more famous for their long-running feud than for the power they wielded in the studio system in Hollywood, they had a lot in common. Both women struggled as single mothers. Each woman forged a career in highly competitive fields when most women did not work outside the home. By telephone, their weapon of choice, Luella and Hedda could drag moguls out of bed, make producers sweat through a charvette shirt, and interrupt a star in the middle of filming a scene. When there were no less than 400 writers competing for stories in the film colony, Luella and Hedda had the largest readership for their daily columns. Their success inspired jealous hit pieces and even physical attacks from men. In comparison, Hopper was getting more readers every day. Her column had been acquired by other syndicates and was carried by 85 metropolitan papers and 5,000 smaller ones. A feud was inevitable. Parsons still had the power of the Hearst organisation behind her, but people now had a choice. Everyone in Hollywood, of course, read both columns. As Luella said, she is trying to do in 2 years what took me 30. Their public and private sniping continued for 2 decades, despite a highly publicised but short-lived reconciliation. Luella and Hedda forged an indelible impact on celebrity journalism that remains visible even nowadays. Each time you read a profile on a film star, their imprint still lingers today. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about Hedda Hopper and Louella Parsons' relationship? It's interesting how hostile and yet ardent could be a rivalry between two women.